Dear guests, dear colleagues, welcome. My name is Szilvia Szőlősi. I'm head of the University Strategy Office in Eötvös Loránd University, ELTE, in short, in Budapest, Hungary. And let me be your moderator for today's Enacting Education for Sustainable Development, spotlight on teaching practices for exploring worldviews, perceptions, and values. This is a webinar of a series of 3 webinars connected to the Enacting Education for Sustainable Development initiative of Trinity College Dublin, which was used as a basis for a so-called CHARM-ED project of the same title. CHARM-ED is a funding call issued by the CHARM-EU European University Alliance, and it is designed to offer funding to support the development, enhancement, or redesign of higher education and lifelong learning activities across the CHARM-EU Alliance. In this project, the University of Barcelona, the University of Budapest, so Eötvös Loránd University, and Trinity College Dublin, all CHARM-EU partners, work together on the review and adaptation of Trinity College's professional development module called Enacting Education for Sustainable Development. And in this framework, we also organized a webinar series. If you did not join the first webinar, do not be afraid, because all the materials, both the recording and the slides, will be available on the CHARM-EU website. But right now you are in webinar 2 of 3, which focuses on the students as partners approach, which is a core element of this module. And I'm very happy to welcome our esteemed colleagues from Trinity College Dublin, Dr. Cicely Roche, and also Mariam Yabo, David Coffey, and Dr. Johnny Johnston, who will be our speakers today. I will not take more of your time, but leave the floor to Dr. Cicely Roche to introduce the webinar, or to start her presentation.
Very pleased to be joining again today. I begin by sharing the acknowledgement slide because CHARM-ED, of course, as Sylvia has acknowledged, but also to remind us, as discussed at length during the first webinar on 19th of December, that much of the content and activities were developed collaboratively by 6 fellows, 4 student interns in Trinity during the 2023-24 Enacting Education for Sustainable Development project, but that many other staff and students impacted in a very significant way on the development of these materials also. And we will today be also introducing how to access the open education resource format of workshops, and in that context, acknowledging Mr. Kevin O'Connor at the Centre for Academic Practice in particular. And finally, the SATL funding under our Higher Education Authority in Ireland must also be acknowledged. So very quickly, I'm going to remind us that this is a CHARM-ED project with colleagues from University of Barcelona and Sylvia and some of her colleagues from Budapest. And the project, of course, aligns with the CHARM-EU vision, but even more particularly with CHARM-EU's 8 educational principles. And I've circled here student-centered as a principle because today's focus on students as partners, and our 2 key speakers today being Mariam and David, really gives us an opportunity from Trinity to explain what we mean by students and partners and how it has impacted so positively on the work being done around ESD and its integration to curriculum in Trinity. The aims today must begin with a very quick overview of webinar 1 content because, of course, not everybody viewing this recording will necessarily have yet accessed that one. To introduce the workshop packs, to provide a very tiny amount of background to what a Students as Partners approach is, and then as fast as I can hand over to David and Mariam, who will present to us and then engage in discussion with our discussant, Johnny. The Enacting Education for Sustainable Development CHARM-ED project grounds itself in the notion that staff experiencing and then integrating to their teaching the UNESCO's preferred pedagogical approaches, i.e. student-centered, action-oriented and fostering transformative approaches, is core to what we do, and hence the notion that there is a 2-hour workshop as a core element and central part of every block or theme we deliver is what we're really bringing to the fore today. And I could not do that in anything like the same way that Mariam, who was central to the development of this workshop, and David, who has that insight and experience of actually adapting it and rolling it out to first-year students, can do. A reminder that, of course, this isn't in isolation from UNESCO, we've already mentioned, national strategy, and above all, our institutional strategic plans up to 25 and the newer one up to 30, integrated into which is our sustainability strategy running from 2023 to 2030. And that sustainability strategy, one of its 4 pillars, the education pillar, commits to all Trinity students and teaching staff will be empowered to develop the knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary to act as agents of change, i.e. not just about telling people about sustainable development, but enabling the development of behaviours that means they can act as an agent of change. And hence again, underpinning for us how important it is and valuable it is to have Mariam and David and their perspectives with us today. How did we get here? The Students as Partners approach was foundational. But this notion of a sort of novice level, integrated, coherent, cogent module on ESD, on enacting ESD, was one of 10 points or 10-point plan that the fellows put together early in 2023. And to remind you that we had 5 fellows in the beginning, and then Claire Kelly replaced Felix in early 24, who were selected following an application process and asked to go away and develop this plan. And of course, supported by a program director, program manager, and program sponsor, our sponsor, of course, being our Vice Provost for Biodiversity and Climate Action. And by October, a similar selection process was undertaken for our student interns in ESD. And we were very fortunate to have Mariam, Freddie, Tom, and William join us at that stage, exactly at the point where the module outline having been developed, we were getting into the nitty-gritty of case and scenario development for the workshop. So Mariam, of course, will share a lot of that today. The common module development, the senior leadership in Trinity came back to the fellows and said yes to this idea of a novice module, so long as it's enabled in a way that every student can access within their discipline and in an interdisciplinary context, and aligned with Trinity's Trinity graduate attributes, of which there are 4, and you'll see them on a later slide and how they align with both UNESCO and CHARM-ED. And we had proposed that it would be UNESCO's preferred pedagogical approaches that would underpin curriculum, and how curriculum activities and workshops in particular will be designed. You can see 4 of us there in the photo on the left undertaking an academic practice workshop to help us move that thinking forward. In the centre, you can see Mariam, and who she was paired with William. She'll mention that today. Beta testing the workshop that is central to the CHARM-ED application, with a mix of staff and student volunteers from Trinity. This was all happening in very rapid time. And I'm looking there and I can see students, I can see one of the consultants from our School of Medicine. I can see a mixture with librarians, etc., involved in that. And very quickly, so we had beta testing sort of between November and February. We piloted with a group of some 40 staff, teaching staff again, including our librarians, and forgive me if I'm forgetting others, but it wasn't just academic teaching staff. And on the right hand side you can see I have circled there Nora Campbell, who of course attended the pilot project and by September was leading the module that rolled out to our School of Business incoming first year students as a compulsory component. And the red arrow directs to Declan Cahill, who coordinates and leads all the workshop leaders there. So you'll hear David mentioning Declan again today. And I point them out because both Nora and David and 2 further PhD students will present in our webinar 3, which is in February. The Enacting Education for Sustainable Development is detailed in that first webinar. It has 5 themes, not necessarily taken in that order, but that probably is the order that the fellows who designed it would feel is the most logical. However, in some schools we find that certainly blocks 2 to 5, they're yellow up to the light green colour, can be delivered from different modules, for example, or spread out a bit more in a longitudinal manner through a programme. But we remain largely focused on this questioning worldviews, perceptions and values related to sustainable development as our theme. And moving on to sharing this webinar, the slides giving detail about each, exploring sustainable existence, talks about let's go fishing, it's a game. And in the 3rd webinar, one of our PhD students will talk about delivering that to undergraduates. Workshop 2 takes an approach at looking at sustainable food futures, because the theme of systems forecasting and complexity. That'll be what our 2nd PhD student in webinar 3 will discuss with us. Workshop 3, which Mariam and Declan or David today will largely deal with, and a reminder that in this case, we're talking about mining in the Congo from 3 different perspectives. Jane, a community perspective, a worker, mother of 2, Grace, a CEO, corporate perspective, and the Minister of Mines giving government policy perspective. And the task being that we have provided in the workshop materials 12 action options, none of which is ideal, that each perspective might take. And of course, the beginning piece is individually having to rate and rank those 12 potential actions. And of course, then you get into the notion of presenting and competing for funding. And I emphasize that a bit because you'll hear reference to those by Mariam and David later in the recording. And workshop 4 is around climate migration further to sea level rise, using that as the basis of looking at problem framing and the prevention, mitigation and adaptation perspective. And of course, the notion that you can't just take a frame such as infrastructure, social tension or environmental vulnerabilities, but they must be taken in a coherent way. So the approach in this workshop is the 3 perspectives ultimately are collaborating. But because I anticipate this could be mentioned, particularly by Mariam, I point out to you that Kiribati happened to be the real world, authentic element, if you like, in this workshop, and it created its own challenges for our workshop leaders. And finally, that vaping challenge to health and environment is the theme for the misinformation related to sustainable development, but a reminder that the second half of that workshop moves into advocacy, upstream advocacy. How might we influence policy as well as at the community level and what we can do within our own sphere of influence. I did say I'd mention the link with the graduate attributes, and of course that was the instruction and the direction from senior leadership in Trinity to the fellows. Yet we had committed to UNESCO as having an understanding of sustainable development deriving from Brundtland in 1987. That is, that sustainable development is meeting the needs of the present while also accommodating the needs of future generations to meet their own needs. And UNESCO's preferred pedagogical approaches, in our minds, were absolutely aligned with UNESCO's 8 competencies, which we feel collectively the 5 themes or 5 blocks in the module sought to address, notwithstanding that the anticipatory futures thinking was a particularly challenging one. So as fellows, we did map those to the behaviours under each of Trinity's graduate attributes: think independently, communicate effectively, develop continuously, and act responsibly. And when we compared all of that with CHARM-ED's educational principles, and at the point of putting an application together, there's so much marriage and balance and connections between those, notwithstanding that we recognise the value of a university alliance such as CHARM-ED to let us sort of poke at and explore the transnational and intercultural learning piece. And that's the value of having 3 partners in this: Budapest, Barcelona, and Dublin. But of course, student-centred and situated learning, I've also highlighted in this slide as 2 of CHARM-ED's educational principles that Mariam and David really give life to, give effect to in having them with us today. Very quickly, I want to return to this slide from that first webinar and highlighted in it that we had included workshop packs are available as open education resources on that same website in Trinity. And obviously our CHARM-ED team will take account of these as we move to try and develop our micro-credential. So I want to very quickly highlight again where that web address is and give you one homepage, index page, and say, and a reminder, these are available as Word documents. If you have any difficulty, contact us around the website for download. They begin by giving some ideas for pre-work for learners, what they might do as pre-reading or activities if you so choose, facilitator guidance, some things as practical as room setup and preparing for the workshop, a 1-page session plan with timings. A lot of our workshop leaders and our academics generally like that. And when we use these in-person small group workshops, we really try to avoid students and learners having to go on their devices. We want them to discuss, debate, negotiate, disagree in person, make use of that time. There's a much more extended facilitators notes and prompts. And again, if possible, Mariam and David will refer to these because they were instrumental in putting these together for the beta testing. And then as we rolled out the workshop to staff, again, updating them and adapting them according to the feedback we got in beta testing. And then, of course, templates for everything in this particular theme on worldviews and values. We have scenarios and case studies by 3, the action options by 12, for each of the 3 justification options, templates that groups and individuals can give peer feedback during the workshop, prepare the presentation, and facilitator checklists, etc., which are likely to aid the assessment process for any of you that might choose to use these separate to the CHARM-ED project. And a reminder that they link with, if you like, the guides for the themes videos that we talked about in webinar 1. I've given you there on the left-hand side what it looks like when you're on the website. You need to scroll down and have repeated some of the acknowledgements and, of course, the Creative Commons and share alike license. I've included an extract similar to what we had in webinar 1 for the workshop pack, and the notion that on the back of some of the templates we include links to what they may have viewed in the videos or not, but the definition for gender equality and social equity from Kate Rawood's work, and an idea or an example of how you could include the beliefs, attitudes, values, etc. definitions, so that your students in your workshops aren't having to go back onto an electronic device to find those in the materials they'll have seen earlier, all in Word format so that people can adapt them as might work for them in their context. And finally, a reminder, of course, that the teaching guides are there. Those are images of the 5 short videos aligned with this particular block, and the ones for the Kiribati case, the climate migration one, are also on that website. And now, in preparation for handing over to Miriam and David and then their discussion following their presentations, a little bit about students as partnerships, in case there's anyone viewing this who hasn't come across this term and maybe is thinking about what we typically do in higher education is, after we've rolled out a module, we send out a survey to students. What did you think of it? Students as partners is terminology in itself. And I've just pulled 3 sort of writers in the field that if somebody is dipping into this the first time might be of value. And I've given you the references on the final slide for these. Healy et al. Talk about partnership as a way of doing things, and not so focused on the outcome of what the partnership produces. And they talk very much about students having a significant amount of autonomy, independence, and choice. And it's obviously they're talking about more holistically than a project like what Trinity has done for ESD, but valuable that you realise that's the grounding for the field. There is an International Journal of Students as Partners, and Healy, last time I looked, is still the editor of that. Then you look at Mercer Mapstone, and they use different language in the notion. They see it as re-envisioning student and staff as active collaborators in teaching and learning. And they take both the broader and that notion of within your classroom as an individual teacher approach as well. And then Matthews and colleague really return to this process idea. In a way, they say process renegotiates ways of working in higher education. And maybe for many of us, or for any of us, we're at different stages of that process of renegotiating the way higher education works around curriculum development, and then the learning from that in order to introduce it to teaching. And for me, I see that as having a huge part of the impact Miriam and David have had on me and my colleagues in this ESD project. And of course, Matthews and colleagues have just included there, they kind of divide that article in 3 around SAP as being a counter narrative, i.e. this mutual learning as we've experienced in this project, it being values-based, needing a lot of trust, respect and openness, and SAP as cultural change, and of course that depends where your institution is at. To bring it a little more towards home, Dale Whelan, and by doing this, give you a sense how it particularly impacted on our ESD project. And Dale Whelan in 2020 wrote just after grappling with that first year of COVID and the changes, and with Dale's insight into student union activity and active membership, he talks about the culture of student partnership and that it has been identified as a means of helping manage resource-constrained environments as well. Now, as we work through our project, I have to acknowledge our students' union were fantastically engaged in our process. And by heavens, they negotiated and argued with us and debated with us, and made time to attend our beta testing, and made time to attend the Citizens' Assembly and actively engage. So Dave Wheelahan here, his article, and I've just pulled this image out of it, the notion he proposes there are 4 activities needed to develop that culture of student partnership in an institution in higher education. And of course, the first is institutional policy. And the second he relates to is this notion of scoping of formal and informal mechanisms of student engagement. And if I hold that thought, and I moved to a 2022 publication by Ben Ryan, the student partner in this pairing, and Johnny Johnston, asking the question, well, why engage in SAP approaches to learning and teaching, putting learning before teaching? And included in their article are resources. And they include a resource on why engage in ESP for each of student and staff. And they also include detailed summaries from the perspective of students and staff. So on this slide, I've just pulled from the student-facing resource for the first question. And it just, it's so heartening to see these bullet points here and know that you're going to have Mariam and David talk to you next. And that notion of shaping the kind of teaching and learning experience you want to have, that notion of teamwork and analysis of curriculum that is there, and critiquing it as how it might be better improved. And of course, on the staff resources he extracts from the summary, everything on the slide is absolutely valid and relevant. But I want to capture the thought that students as partners approaches are process-oriented, which we know from the evidence base in the field, and developmental. And I've underlined that because they're developmental, not just for the students, but for the likes of me and teaching staff as well. And for that reason, I mention a publication in the International Journals for Students of Partners, for which myself and Johnny Johnston were 2 of the 8 authors. And in parallel and absolutely central to our work were 2 students, Lane Abria and Alex McKibben, in their 4th year of pharmacy, where I was their professional mentor. They were doing a 4-month placement in the notion of education and curriculum design as a emerging role in pharmacy, and that's what made it so valid. And of course, that was informed by Ben Ryan's and Johnny Johnston's work in 2022. And the learning from that process with Johnny Johnston stood to me when I suddenly found in October of 2023, that we now had 4 ESD fellows. And suddenly things were moving so fast. We had approval for a 101 novice level module. We had in our heads a concept of 2-hour workshops that would be central to this. And the interns, of which Mariam was one, were going to be actually the leads to development and rollout of the beta testing of these workshops. And for that reason, as Sylvia has outlined for you, of course, Johnny Johnston was a touchstone as to the tools I would use in that process. And Johnny Johnston is known to Mariam and David and will be our discussant at the end of Mariam and David's presentations. And Mariam, you have the information there as to some of Mariam's background, her already expertise in this area. I've mentioned multiple times how she was central to my work as an ESD fellow, and we've continued to collaborate. But I will say that if I could only pick 10 people who'd had a huge influence on me and what had been an absolutely increasing commitment to the area of education sustainable development over the last 3 years, Mariam would also make that list. So over to you, Mariam, and for the viewers. Mariam is going to take about 5 minutes, then David is going to take about 5 minutes, back to Mariam for 5 minutes, and we'll hand over to our discussant Johnny at that stage. I will watch the chat box, but Sylvia will handle the Q&A at the end of the session. And thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Cecily, for that wonderful introduction. If we could just move to the next slide and I'll get started. So I'm going to talk about the experience from my perspective as a student partner. What did the partnership look like? How did students as partners work? What was the impact on me as a student partner? What did student contribution look like? And finally, some advice for universities or practitioners that are considering this approach. Next slide, please. So what did the partnership look like in practice? So from my experience, students as partners in the context of the ESD module meant students were involved at the level where real decisions were being made rather than being asked to comment on work that had already been designed. From the outset of workshop design, we were part of discussions about what themes mattered, what sustainability challenges were important to center, what kind of case studies were appropriate, how problems should be framed, and all these different things. So it went beyond consultation. We were involved in shaping the substance, the structure, and the direction of the workshops. Another key element of this was trust. We were trusted with responsibility, not just invited to contribute ideas. And this level of responsibility definitely changed how seriously we approached the work as well. Thirdly, we were also recognized as knowledge holders. Our lived experiences, our disciplinary backgrounds, and generational perspectives were treated as legitimate forms of knowledge and expertise rather than informal input. There was also a significant amount of interdisciplinary collaboration was very central to how the partnership functioned. So I was paired with a medical student and I come from a law background, and we approached sustainability challenges differently. We prioritized different risks, and this difference definitely strengthened the workshops because it forced us to design material that could speak across disciplines rather than to a single academic audience. And finally, the partnership was intergenerational. The ESD fellows brought pedagogical experience, they brought institutional knowledge and experience in curriculum design. While as students, we brought an awareness of the kinds of sustainability issues that resonate with our peers, the language that feels authentic to us, and even the frustrations as well that many students feel when sometimes sustainability is presented as a distant or depoliticized issue. So the fellows did not steer us towards any predetermined outcomes. They created structured spaces for dialogue where ideas could be tested, refined. Weekly meetings definitely reinforced that this was a collaborative process and not just a symbolic one. I'll hand over to David.
Sure. So thank you so much there,
Sorry.
Mariam.
Just David, just to introduce you, just again to remind people that David is already expert in this area. This will have been included in the pre-notification of this webinar, but reproduced here so that you have it. But why is David here today even more so derives from during the pilot to the staff May to July 2023, we had 5 of the workshop leaders from the School of Business also engage as partners. And David was at every single one of those sessions and already vocal in a way was impacting, even though he mightn't have realized it, on how those workshop materials would have been adapted for student or for future staff sessions. More importantly, a key part of me as the fellow module coordinator for this, maintaining an understanding of what helped to make this roll out in practice and what hindered it, included that we asked and were absolutely facilitated that the School of Business would enable me to sit in on that module. Now, that was fine when Nora Campbell was delivering to 550 students in a large theatre. I sat within the students to see their reaction. But I needed somebody prepared to let me, on their first outing, sit in on the workshop as they delivered it to 15 to 17 first-year students in Trinity, multidisciplinary in terms of they were from across the 5 programs in the School of Business. And David welcomed me in, not just to the first one, but to the second one as well. And that has had obviously a big impact on rapid feedback to us as fellows and others involved as staff members trying to roll these things out. So over to you, David, and thank you again.
Perfect. So I was just invited here today to discuss my participation in enacting sustainable development during the beta testing phase as a workshop leader during the rollout in year 1 and in year 2 as a trainer training in other workshop leaders for year 2. So I was just going to give a little bit of my reflections on how I found the process, some key themes that came up, and also some advice for anybody considering taking the module forward. So Cicely has already given a good bit of context on enacting sustainable development, but as a refresher, the way we work the module in the business school is that we have 5 workshops, with this Congo one coming right in the middle. It is delivered to first-year undergraduate business school students in their first semester. So it's usually 15 to 17 to a room, usually with pre-arranged seating. And overall, we run it as a true workshop. So there's very little content delivery during the workshops, and a lot of student games, student participation, and debates. So our primary role as workshop leaders is to prompt, provoke, and promote healthy but challenging debate between students. And that's kind of what I want to discuss today as part of my reflections. I wanted to give a little bit of an anecdote about that kind of ethos of non-threatening but challenging debate and how that worked out in practice in the Congo workshop. The Congo workshop illustrated this ethos really, really well, and I think it's essential to both this workshop and also the other 4 workshops in general. So not to go too deep on the content of the workshop itself, but essentially it calls on students to adopt one of 3 perspectives on Congolese mining. It drives at concepts like intersectionality, sustainable development, Western colonialism, and non-Western, but particularly Chinese neocolonialism. And it's in the spirit of kind of non-threatening but challenging debates that I actually had several students take me to task over the last point, the Chinese neocolonialism point. They highlighted, that in the context of Congolese mining, that bringing up Chinese neocolonialism was unfair to both China and the Congo. And essentially, they were making the argument that any mining deals made between China and the Congo were fair deals made between 2 partners with perfect agency. And to highlight problems with this is kind of an inherently sort of paternalistic view as it relates to the global south. Now, for context, these students are first years, so that is like a very, even to get them to challenge or to push back on a module is one thing, but to come with such a clever point is another. And so why the challenge? I would say definitely threw me for a bit. It was kind of at that point that I realized that the Congo workshop, but also enacting sustainable method of encouraging debate was working. In the short term, I tried to rebut the point by showing how the course kind of aims to respectfully challenge all countries. For example, in our first workshop, we're quite critical of the Irish agricultural sector. And we all are trying to embrace this throughout the 5 workshops, this idea that we're all in this together and that sustainability is a global problem. But in year 2, I really tried to make more efforts to build in this challenge from the students into the workshops much earlier when I was teaching. So for example, in year 2, I was involved in training up new workshop leaders. and I ensure that they knew something like this, questions about the very nature of what sustainable development is, what it means, how it means different things to different people, that these questions were likely to come up and that they should welcome it and they should encourage it. In my own teaching in year 2, I tried to encourage these questions much earlier on. I used this anecdote in class to explain to the students that when we mean challenging debates, that means everyone's points are up for debate, including my own. So I suppose the reason I'm kind of bringing it up today is that as sort of a recommendation for anyone interested in taking ESD, but also the Congolese workshop forward. Because I think this encouraging of debate really did bear fruits in year 2. The results were quite clear. I, had a moment or two like this anecdote every single class. Students would take an interest in challenging me, and you could really see students take ownership over the workshop and their learning. Students were kind of anticipating what type of discussions would be had and would come to class prepared with extra reading done. And it really made a huge difference, I feel. So I just want to end off with a few points of encouragement for anyone who would like to use Block 3 in the future. I would say that respectful debate, first of all, should definitely be encouraged. I think it made a dramatic change on the students. As anyone who's ever taught first years will know, they're usually quite shy, especially in the first semester. But by the end of ESD, students were active and engaged. And I really would put that down to being forced to debate and having taught a few of those students later on in successive classes. You can definitely see a difference, I would say. But also kind of the second thing I would like to encourage is a sort of broader flexibility. So the context of Trinity Business School is that it's highly multicultural. And when you got that critique from the student, it kind of threw me for a loop. It made me consider that, I need to take more personal account of the fact that I was raised in a particular system, which prioritizes certain language as it relates to the global south. And that kind of approach would not cut it in a multicultural school. It can be very easy, I think, in the age of like misinformation and disinformation for nuanced ideas to get missed, especially in a short workshop environment. So it kind of made me really mindful of that. And it brought home this idea that a workshop on sustainable development will collapse if you're perceived as having any slant at all. So the whole thing was I really helped with this flexible approach to the workshops that we took. Every single workshop after it, we and the workshop leaders would discuss together as a team what works, what doesn't. And I find the whole process was really kind of helped by this retooling along the way. So I'd like to kind of encourage a little bit of a think on your feet mentality when implementing the block, because I think, details can get tweaked as long as, healthy debate is encouraged. So yeah, that kind of brings me to the end of my reflections, and I'll hand it back over to Mariam to continue with her portion, and I'll join again in the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dave. So my next part will be focused on how the ESD process impacted me. So the first main thing to point out is the interdisciplinary knowledge that I was exposed to. As a PhD researcher in climate law, the ESD process definitely exposed me to a breadth of sustainability knowledge that I would not normally encounter within a legal research context. So sustainability itself is inherently interdisciplinary, and working closely with ESD fellows from different backgrounds and student partners from different backgrounds gave me access to a lot of technical, scientific insights. And for example, I learned a lot about concepts like earth systems and resource limits and energy, and it was all in an accessible way as well, which I found really helpful. The second thing is I gained curriculum design skills. So the internship developed my skills in so many ways. I gained experience in creating workshop material and developing case studies and all these different things that are definitely very important to have. Thirdly, I also gained workshop facilitation skills. So this includes things like designing prompts to guide discussions and workshops, moderating discussions, navigating disagreement within workshops, and helping groups work through complexity as well. And these skills are now directly transferable to my academic and applied work. And finally, on a personal level, the process increased my confidence in working across disciplines and engaging with audiences beyond my own field. It reinforced the value of collaboration and adaptability and reflective practice and so on. And these are skills and habits that continue to shape how I approach my research, teaching, and other things. If we can go to the next slide. So in terms of the contributions that we made as student partners, one that stands out to me, especially in the context of Block 3, is the advocating for the use of real-world case studies rather than hypothetical scenarios. Early in the process, we had discussed potentially using fictional cases as a way to bring sustainability challenges and issues to light. And my view was that there's real-world cases that offer a strong foundation for engagement because they reflect existing injustices and material conditions and power dynamics and so on. And this led to the development of the Congolese mining case study, which enabled engagement with different issues such as extraction, labor, environmental harm, gendered violence, and global supply chains as well. And a key learning moment for me within that went really well. We did a beta testing workshop on the Congolese mining case study, and it went really well. And then for the following work that we did then, which was developing a case study on problem framing for Block 4, we decided to use another real case as an example because we thought the last approach worked well. But during this process, a key learning moment emerged for me. I realized that using real cases carries ethical responsibilities. And when we draw on the lived experiences of communities that are facing issues like exploitation or displacement, we're not just creating teaching tools, we're representing real people's lives. And this realization has definitely led me to develop greater care in problem framing and an increased sensitivity to representation and voice and responsibility and all these different things. So the Congolese mining case study in particular has had a lot of impact in terms of how I view sustainability itself. And if we can go to the next slide. In terms of the advice that I would give to universities or educators that are seeking to implement students as partners, I would say the first and most important lesson is to involve students early. Partnership, in my experience, works best when students are invited into the problem framing stage rather than being asked to comment on decisions that have already been made. And early involvement definitely allows students to influence priorities and assumptions and design choices in a way that is not possible later on in the process. Secondly, partnership needs to be designed around dialogue. So students as partners is not just about dividing tasks. It's also about creating structured opportunities for conversation, for disagreement, for negotiation, and so on. And this requires time. It requires regular meetings. It requires a willingness to work through different things. So that includes uncertainty rather than aiming for a quick consensus, for example. Third, I think pairing across disciplines, in my experience, is very valuable, especially for sustainability-focused initiatives. Sustainability challenges do not sit neatly within a single discipline, and I think interdisciplinary collaboration even within students mirrors the complexity of real-world decision-making, and these pairings can help to prevent narrow framing, and they can also encourage careful consideration of trade-offs and impacts and all these different things. And finally, staff pedagogical support is absolutely crucial. Partnership does not mean leaving students to navigate curriculum design on their own. Academic staff play a key role in supporting students to translate their ideas into effective learning experiences, helping them to think about things like sequencing and learning outcomes and accessibility and engagement and so on. So that balance between autonomy and guidance is what makes partnership meaningful rather than overwhelming for students. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mariam. And I see Johnny Johnston there. I will hand over to Johnny for the...
Thank you, Cecily. Hopefully you can hear me there.
Yes,
hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, I see people nodding. Yeah. Excellent. Folks, I just want to say firstly, congratulations. Like, I think it's such a, I love hearing so much about your reflections and how much really, how nuanced your insights are into partnership as a process. And I just think it's a really worthwhile project, and it's very closely to me. I suppose one of the questions that I would have for both of you, how has your view of education for sustainable development changed or evolved through your own engagement with the module?
I suppose I can take that first, maybe, Mariam, if you're okay with that. I would say it definitely illustrated the difficulty in achieving consensus. The workshops as a whole were very gamified. There was a lot of, they're all driving at sustainable development, but we kind of ask students to adopt a perspective or role play a perspective, or participate in a team game. And the role playing perspectives in particular, students get really kind of into it. They very much become their role. And we kind of don't shy away from the perspectives. We try to make them a little bit uncomfortable. For example, in the Congo case, you role play a striking mother with hungry children, and you're presented with an array of action options, and none of them are good. So I think the students would agree you get kind of all sorts of human behaviors in this environment. As part of the workshop, students are forced to act in a way that's greedy or selfish or self-interested. And you can kind of see the effect of that behavior on consensus, even in a class environment. And it kind of starts to, I don't know, like reflect the sort of attitude to climate and sustainability that you might hear from a regular person on the street or in like media these days or something like that. Kind of reflected, I'd say, how delicate consensus building can be when subjected to certain, personal incentives or things like that. So that's kind of what I'd say.
Perfect. And
Perfect.
just to add,
Mariam, go on ahead.
Perfect, thank you. So mine is quite brief. I just think reflecting on the whole experience in the context of sustainable development education, I would say I now understand sustainability itself as a problem that definitely requires interdisciplinary thinking and ethical care, and educational innovation is very important. I see sustainability itself as an evolving issue that we have to keep addressing as well. I see sustainable development as something that has to be continuously questioned and revised. The Congolese mining case study, for example, I think another key learning moment for me is realizing that Congolese minerals are very important for the energy transition as well. And based on block 3, what we realize is the way that the cobalt is extracted is not ethical and it's not sustainable. And if we need this mineral to transition to a more sustainable world, then it means we definitely have to be sustainable in how we are achieving sustainability. I think that was a very important realization for me.
Good to get a sense of. It's a really nice link to my next question. So you're talking, both of you are talking really in a really nuanced way about kind of evolving relationships and kind of evolving perspectives. If you were to kind of shift that over very slightly, I mean, we're very good in the university about talking about impact. And impact, as you know, can happen at all kinds of levels. It can be immediate, it can be mini, micro, macro, super. What's your perspective? What's been the biggest impact of the module?
I can take this. So I think for me, one of the biggest impacts would be that the module approaches sustainability in a way that is innovative, in a way that is interdisciplinary, in a way that is intergenerational. The way that the workshops, for example, are, it means people also get to have fun in the process while participating in these activities. The fishing, one of the blocks has a fishing game that is quite interesting, and it's quite an innovative approach to learning. I think one of the biggest impacts from my perspectives would be that this module shows that students as partners works, and at an institutional level, I think that students as partners model is a major strength because it shows alternative ways of producing knowledge. And this has implications far beyond this module. It models a different relationship between students and staff within curriculum design. And I see the impact in how transferable the pedagogical model is. I'll leave it there.
All right, and
David,
I
you're
suppose
up.
my reflections will be mostly focused on the students, because that's kind of my biggest experience, the enacting sustainable development. I definitely say it has a dramatic effect on their confidence and their ability to speak about sustainability in a very nuanced way, I would say. I think, when you think about college, I think like defending points, being able to critique your own points, critique others' points is kind of what it's all about. I kind of would go so far as to say that any college that doesn't do that is doing a bit of disservice to their students. So I think, that's one of the biggest impacts. I think you can really see it's like a silver bullet for these students. They get really into it. They grow in themselves. They're able to tell you, you're wrong. And I'm like, that's great, fantastic. Tell me why, you know. So I'd say that's probably the biggest impact I've seen personally, anyway.
Good answer. Couldn't agree more. I think that is hugely impactful. And the last question, which I promise is not a trap. Promise it's not a trap. Thinking right back to, I mean, you've been involved with the project for quite some time now. If you were doing it all again and thinking back to the very beginning, your first trip across it, what advice do you think you would give to the then version of you?
I'm happy to go first. So I think I would tell myself to embrace the opportunity that is before me. I think when we did start to realize as student partners that what we were doing was going to be very impactful, it is something that thousands of people are going to engage with. We are shaping the way that people view a lot of issues. We realized there's so much responsibility there. And my advice to myself would be to trust the process earlier, even reduce the urge to overstructure or oversimplify. There was a time we were given a set of questions about what is sustainability and sustainable development. And I was trying to think about everything I knew about sustainable development so I could make sure I had the right answer. But now I realize issues like sustainability, it's not always black and white. There's no right answer per se because different perspectives are very important, and it's better to bring that uniqueness that you have in you because that contributes to a broader understanding of sustainability as an issue. So the process has taught me that meaningful sustainable education often would emerge from allowing uncertainty and complexity to remain visible. And I would remind myself as well that the partnership will take time. Students as partners is something that takes a lot of effort and dialogue and iteration, and the reflection is what gives the work depth and durability. Thank you.
I'd mirror those points, I think, about complexity, certainly. when I was, teaching this module for the first time, I was worried that, maybe like a lot of the philosophical focus would get maybe lost in first years, or they wouldn't engage with it, or they'd rather just learn, specifics. But so I was kind of nervous about like front loading a lot of the, you know, questions about what sustainability means and all that sort of stuff. And honestly, I think I underestimated them. I think they're well capable of it. And I think was I to start doing it again, I would, you know, lean into the philosophical stuff a little bit more, because I think that's where the biggest kind of leaps and bounds can be made. So that's probably what I do. Not be afraid of the mess and the complexity, I think.
I think complexity comes up a couple of times there from both of you. Complexity, depth, messiness, and I think we've got to be upfront that messiness is a big part of learning for everyone as well. So, okay, I'm going to stop talking, I think, because I think that's probably a pretty good place to kind of to open it out to the wider kind of bit. Sylvia, have we any other kind of questions coming in there?
Thank you very much for the discussion. Thank you, David and Mariam, for sharing your experiences, your personal experiences and your suggestions for the adoption or engaging in this approach. And I think that your testimonials were actually the perfect proof that it's really worth to engage in students as partners, in the students as partners approach. Thanks to Johnny for leading the discussion. We have basically two major questions that we received from colleagues earlier on. So let me convey these two questions to you and open up the discussion again. The first question is, what are the evaluation criteria of students in the students as partners approach?
Yes, so we have, it sits within the regular, Trinity rubric, marking rubric. But for our own, the way we kind of break down how the students get marked is so they have over the course of the year, they have one exam at the end that's 40%, and that exam is very heavy on the content and like, do you understand what Kate Raworth is saying about the donut economics and all this sort of stuff. So that's where they really kind of have to drill down on the content and understand the content. And then the other 60% is marked by me and the other workshop leaders. So we're the ones who have face-to-face interactions with these 15 to 17 students, and we mark their attendance and participation. So they get marks for showing up, they get marks for, showing up like informed and prepared. They get marks for engaging, critiquing, just coming up, like, being a full body in the room. They get marks for that. And yeah, so I would say, so 60% for in-person attendance and participation, and then 40% for an exam. So it's a lot more on how you engage in the process as opposed to like how much content you can learn, which I think is better. Obviously, it's important to learn the content and stuff, but like it's engaging with the material as well as what you want,
Thank you very much. I don't know if Johnny or Mariam left. So Johnny would also jump in here with an answer, or you find Dave's response full as it is?
The honest answer is I have very little to add to that, because I think, Dave, what you really kind of, you touched on so many of those core issues there. So I kind of don't really want to undercut it.
Thank you. Right. And the next question is, how do you move on from role plays to real life challenges? That is, how do you encourage responsibility in students?
I'll start with that one. So from role plays to responsibility, I think that one of the key things to be aware of is that unless you have practiced something, it's not automatic, it's not reflex. So I think that one of the keys is to remember that role plays offer a place where you can trial the ideas. It's okay to get it wrong, and have some kind of, role plays are where and how you develop the resilience to get it wrong and bounce back, and that's the skill set that I think we're trying to promote. So I think it's a natural evolution. The more comfortable you are, kind of almost when it moves to reflex through role play, that's whenever you're ready to move it from being a notional abstract idea to being a practical idea. Dave may disagree, of course.
I think that's a good insight. I would say just, and I'm wedding very close to like what we actually did in class here a little bit. Whether this applies beyond the class environment, I don't know. But the way we try to do it, I think, in a class environment or when we're delivering the workshop is we don't like allow the students to participate in these role plays and then go and leave without coming up with solutions. Because it's very, very easy to sit there and be like pointing out problems or pointing out flaws or being cynical, but we force the students to, actually engage with, okay, how do you solve this then? And sometimes you get a little bit of a pushback, like that's part of their attendance and participation. So it's like, yeah, they actually have to do it, but you get a bit of a pushback and it's like, I don't know how to solve, problems around ethical mining in the Congo. And you kind of have to keep coming back to them and being like, well, you're going to need to know how to solve it because it's this generation that's going to need to do it. So it's like we don't allow them to leave the room without having to actually engage with solutions. Because I think it's, for me anyway, I think it's the easiest thing in the world to just sit there and know what the problem is or point out the different aspects of the problem. But like, how do you actually fix it? Like the cold-faced reality of it. And also this allowance that there's no wrong answers. There are some wrong answers. You can't go crazy and like sci-fi and all that sort of stuff. But generally there's no wrong answers. Try some ideas out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That's what I would say.
Thanks a lot.
What's the line? Try, fail, try again, do better, something like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
100%.
And this brings me to another question, because you were talking much about the design process, but also the rollout process, and it was all in a positive manner, but definitely you had challenges at some points, either in the design process or in the rollout. And what would you say, what was the biggest challenge that you had to face in the implementation of the module or the workshop?
I don't know if Cicely wants to take this one or I will, but basically, again, I'm giving you only a classroom environment kind of situation, but I would say in the initial first few minutes and hours of the ESD environment in the classes, yeah, it's getting the students to realize, like, you got to think that we're delivering these to first years, and they're 18 years old. It's their first semester in college. For many of these people, it's their first week in education that's not secondary education. So, a lot of these people will have a career in mind, and especially in a business school, they think, okay, I want to be an accountant, or I want to be a CEO or something like that. And they all of a sudden they come in and they're learning about Congolese mining and having to learn about farming and all this sort of stuff, and fishing and overfishing. And sometimes they can be like, okay, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why is this mandatory? Why do I have to do this? 100%. And it's they get it at the end of the 5 workshops. They definitely get it. It's just in that first few classes, you have to be like, you're doing this because, if you end up, managing a company or working in an accountancy firm, we want the leaders of the future, the business leaders of the future, to be able to think in a nuanced way about sustainable development. We want them to be able to understand that there's ethical implications. And business school is great, but that is something that business school students should be forced with. They should, frankly, they don't get enough ethical education in business schools, I think. And I think that's what we're trying to relay. I think it's there is no like business without the environment. So it's that sort of approach, I think. I don't know. It's getting them to realize that. So that's my ramble. I don't know if Cicely wants to add to that or anything, but
thank you.
That's great, David, and you have the experience at the front edge, you know, with the undergraduate students. So if I put my module coordinator of the staff development, professional development piece of it, and it actually brings us nicely back, Sylvia, to what the CHARM-ED project is about. So from the point of view of teaching staff in higher education, we usually teach from the basis of our own area of expertise. In the area of education for sustainable development, that is turned on its head. So we're asking teaching staff to both engage with student-centered, action-oriented, potentially transformative learning approaches to implementing curriculum. And at the same time, we are asking them to do it from subject matter for which you, David, are more expert than I. So for that reason, the most challenging piece is often for teaching staff to understand. Our aim is that they first take an experiential approach to experiencing the workshop. So they feel the emotional turmoil David has explained far better than I ever could today. And that feeling, there isn't a right answer to this, etc. And then think about that's the atmosphere I have to create in the workshop when I deliver it. That's one of the key additional challenges of education for sustainable development in higher education. Is that a reasonable response, Sylvia?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much. Our time with the webinar has come to an end. So again, thank you for all the very inspiring insights to all our speakers. We will next meet on the 16th of February for the third of this three-part webinar series. So please, everyone, save the date. And of course, the recording and the slides for today's webinar will be shared on the CHARM-ED website, as I mentioned earlier. So anyone who could not join us live today can look at these resources. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.